So the last time we were out with this car, we ended up getting involved in a couple of incidents that put us around backwards. Unfortunately, when that happens, it's a good idea to go through and replace at least your trailing arm lollipop bolts. I'll show you guys where those are if you don't know. But those are the bolts that tend to see the most stress whenever you go around for the rear end. I guess just the way that the suspension geometry is, it puts all the car's weight on those two bolts. We typically go with grade 5 back there because grade 5 has less of a chance shearing and more of a chance to bend rather than the grade 8 counterpart of just completely shearing off. It's not necessarily better, but we're of the opinion that we'd rather still be able to roll the car on the trailer if we were to get into an incident bad enough to bend the bolts rather than not have a chance to get the trailing arm back on. So obviously we're looking in from the rear hatch of the car here. We've got our rear gear right here all the way across, and you see these two bars that go towards the front of the chassis. Those are the trailing arms. And you can see right in there is where our bolt is located. Those are the bolts that we need to replace because for whatever reason, those mounting points on the chassis, I guess, are where most of the weight is centralized whenever the car goes backwards on the rear end. Now we are going to take both of the Panhard bar bolts off as well as the ones for the rear upper link just to take a look at those and probably just replace them anyway since we bought them. And we'll probably go through our right front over here, check these bolts. Since we did have a little bit of contact here, you can see we've got a little bit of a blemish on the fender. I don't think we actually touched wheels. I think we just went around from hitting our fender and the rest hitting our Nerf bar. So I don't think that there's any actual damage to the suspension up front, but we'll pull everything. We'll pull all the bolts off from up there and just kind of go through them and see what we got to do. This is the location of the left rear trailing arm bolt. Definitely less than ideal of a spot to try and get to. There's a hole in the sheet metal to help us get through from the other side, but with the seat being here, definitely makes it quite a bit difficult. You can barely see the hole. So we're gonna try and get a ratchet in there. Hopefully we can get that bolt out without having to take the seat out. So obviously these bolts don't actually look too bad, but they've definitely seen better days. You can see we are using grade 5. That's what these 3 hash marks on the head of the bolt identify. And we are replacing them with even more grade 5. Obviously this is all up to personal preference. Our personal preference is to use grade 5 because, explained earlier, they tend to bend more than shearing off, so that's kind of a plus. This one's off of our right rear trailing arm at the lollipop. You can see there's a bit of looks like some grease and whatnot trapped in the threads there where it was threading into the lollipop. Threads themselves don't look too bad, but the amount of stress on it, I can't imagine that this bolt would last very well into the future. And then this one's off of the left rear here. This one's looking significantly better, but I'd still rather just go ahead and replace them both since I'm already down there, since I've already got them pulled off. With the trailing arms disconnected, the rear did shift forward a little bit, so we're gonna have to muscle it back into place as we're putting it back. But overall, probably shouldn't be too difficult. Again, this is just a recommendation made by other people that I'm gonna follow just because these bolts are cheap enough to go ahead and replace, and it's really not all that difficult. So we just finished up replacing all the bolts that we were going to replace back here, to include all the trailing arm bolts, all of the third link and Panhard bar bolts, even the ones attached to the rear end, but I'm not going to show you those because those are a really difficult angle to get with this camera. One thing I want to point out is that we obviously do not have a double shear bracket on our rear end, but we do have it on the chassis. We also don't have any on our trailing arms. I don't know if you could see the lollipop too well, but there's no double shear bracket, so this definitely is quite a bit of an older chassis. Definitely want to go through those during the off season and try and get those welded on and give us a little bit more strength in the rear end, try and keep these from snapping off on us. Luckily that didn't happen for us this time, and we're going to continue to hope that it doesn't happen. One more bolt that I want to go through and replace is actually the bolt that attaches to our brake pedal here. There's a nice little 1/4x20 through bolt right here that attaches through our pedal with a little bit of a spacer. We also opted to use grade 5 bolts for those, as those ones are prone to snapping as well from the people I've known that you've used grade 8. There are double shear bracket brake pedals available on the market. We obviously don't have one. Maybe that'll be something for the future, but that's probably the last bolt I want to go through and replace. All the ones on the front seemed okay. Nothing seemed cracked or bent, or any of the threads were chewed up. So I think we're gonna leave these ones up here and go through and nut and bolt the rest of the car, and we'll be ready to go on and load her back up into the trailer for our next round. Now real quick, before we go and swap out our red box, I wanted to show you real quick why we use grade 5 for some of our stuff. This bottom bolt here was the one that attached our brake pedal to our master cylinder, and I don't know if it's super easy to tell on camera, but that thing is bent quite a bit. Because it's such a small bolt, it's hard to tell, but whenever I spin it on my own, pretty easy to identify that our bolt is quite bent. And that's just from the way our setup is down here for our brake pedal. Obviously we don't have another piece coming off of it to act as a double shear point, so it's really just taking all of the abuse and all the pressure onto that one side, and bends pretty easily there. So definitely something that we check quite often on our car, and replace the bolt once we realize it's bent. Might be a little bit easier to see here, maybe not, I don't know. But it is bent, so we went ahead and replaced it. And yeah, now time to swap out our red box. So obviously it wasn't super difficult to swap out our red box here. A lot of the components on this car are very easy to switch in a very short amount of time, and these cars are kind of designed with that in mind. These cars have very minimal parts compared to the other classes that run beside it, such as the late models and whatnot. Everything's very simplified system-wise. It's only a 4-cylinder motor. Even with the FZ09, it's only 3-cylinder. Not a lot of stuff that would need to be changed at the track, and of the stuff that would need to be changed, it's pretty simple to get to and swap out relatively quickly. There's one last thing I want to do before we actually start closing the car up and trying to get it on the trailer, and that's actually changing our ride heights. As I mentioned before, we are all over the place across the car. Each of our corners are something different. I'll actually have our numbers of what we measured at the track last time. Yeah, they're not very pretty here, so we're gonna go ahead and try and get those switched up, try and get them done relatively quickly, and hopefully we're still within our weight capacity and our percentages. So once we get that straightened up and know that we're in the right for our weight, then we'll go ahead and close everything back up, and hope that our next track day is something that we can drive away from again. You know, we've been really fortunate this season to not have anything major happen to the car, and we've been able to drive it onto the trailer every single night. So hoping to keep that trend continuing. Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and try and get these ride heights changed. So after about a half hour on our end, we were finally able to get all 4 corners set properly to what someone gave us. We're gonna test that out and see how well it works for us. Unfortunately, we have a 333 gear in the rear end, and I guess at CNS with a 1250, it's recommended to run a 330 gear in 3rd gear. You know, sometimes you can go up to a 358 or 410 and run 4th or 5th, but unfortunately for us, no one has those gears available, and neither do they have 330s, so we're kind of stuck with the 333. We do have some spare gears over there on the shelf, but unfortunately the only spare gear we have relatively close is another 333. So we're just gonna ride out this year with this gear and maybe buy a new one in the off season. But the car is much lower. It is getting kind of late, so I'm probably gonna go to bed here. We'll scale it in the morning and see if we need to make any adjustments, and then do our final prep. Make sure all of our tools and batteries are charged and whatnot. start loading everything up in the trailer, and hopefully, like I said before, we have a successful track day on Saturday. We've just finished putting our car on the scale after putting it all together. We checked our toe. We were quite a bit off. I think that 97 ended up nicking the rear section of our front tire and ended up pushing us to an inch out on toe. So we ended up bringing that back in to where we need it to be. After setting our ride heights, we are still within our spec. We are kind of a heavier car. You know, most of our percentages are still within where they need to be. The tail is, you know, less than 52%, which is what INEX requires. And when I sit in the car, we're just above 1300 with more than 610 on the right side. So we do still meet our minimum requirements. I don't know what different percentages will do in terms of car handling or whatnot. I haven't looked too much into that kind of stuff. For the most part, we just go by ride height, tire pressures, and, you know, make sure we have negative camber on the right front, positive camber on the left front. Try to get our rear end as square as possible to the front. So for the most part, we're kind of just using this year for our seat time. Don't know what our plan is for next year yet. We got to work it out on our own, because obviously we don't know what the schedule is going to look like. We know we're probably at least going to continue to run up at Colorado National, just because we know that they're going to have a season and they'll probably run a minimum of 10 or 11 races. So we got to start our budget now, get all that together, and figure out at least some money that we need to set aside for it. Ideally, it'd be cool to either sell this car and pick up an FZ car so that we can be on the newer platform and not have to worry about rebuilding as often, or, you know, selling off all of our 1250 stuff and doing the swap. But with the prices that swaps are nowadays, it's almost cheaper just to sell the car and try and pick up a different one. Maybe even a brand new car, who knows, but I don't think we have that in our budget. So we've got everything scaled out, and we're gonna drop the car, do all of our final touches, check all of our last few bolts, and then we can load her up. There's really not a lot of things left to do before we load the car up in the trailer and head to the track. We made quite a few changes. A lot of them are pretty major, I'd say, especially the ride height one, but we're still within our weights. In fact, I think our weights are pretty close to what they were before, so it doesn't seem like it shifted it too much around, but it's probably better overall for the handling. Hopefully we'll be a little bit quicker. Like I said, we're kind of stuck with a 333 in the rear end, and we're supposed to be running a 330 at CNS, so hopefully that doesn't hurt us too much. I mean, we've been able to keep up with most of the slower cars towards the rear in fourth gear, so it hasn't been too much of an issue. But we've definitely made a lot of changes. Obviously, we went through, changed out our red box right in front of the firewall over here. Yeah, those were pretty much our two main ones, just the ride height and red box. Hopefully our breaking up issue is resolved by that. If not, then I'm not really sure what other direction we need to go. We'll do our last quick nut and bolt check, top off our fluids, and make sure everything else is good to go. We'll sand our brake pads, make sure that they can grab next time we go out. But other than that, it's really not too difficult and not something that I feel like needs to be done on camera to get you guys caught up to speed. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Appreciate you guys watching. Hope to catch you in the next one.